Imagine the clock strikes midnight. The house is eerily silent and you can hear your own breath. But then a sound, a creak, a shuffle, a whisper breaks the stillness. You freeze. It's coming from somewhere inside your house, but you're alone. Or so you thought. As your heart begins to race, you realize something is in your home, something that should not be there. The night has just begun, and the horrors of the dark are waking up. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into 3 terrifying dead of night horror stories that will keep you up long after the lights go out. The dead of night holds more than just silence. It's a time when shadows come alive, and the things that go bump in the dark are closer than you think. So grab a blanket, lock your doors, and get ready for some spine-chilling tales you won't forget anytime soon. Story 1, The Midnight Visitor, by Ava Knight. My name is Ava Knight, and what I'm about to share with you is something I can never forget. Even now, years later, the memory still sends chills down my spine. It all started on an ordinary Wednesday night. I had been visiting my cousin's house in the suburbs, a place I knew all too well. The house was old, creaky floorboards, narrow hallways, and an overgrown garden that seemed to whisper secrets even in daylight. It was the kind of house that looked haunted before the sun even set, but it was familiar, and I'd spent countless nights there with no issue. That night, however, was different. After a long day of catching up, we ended up watching a movie. We laughed, ate too much popcorn, and lost track of time. When the credits rolled, I glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. I decided to head up to bed, the house unusually quiet for that time of night. I thought little of it at first, assuming it was the stillness of the late hour. But as I walked down the hallway, the silence began to feel suffocating. The old floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and as I moved closer to the staircase, I heard something else. A faint sound, footsteps. They echoed behind me, soft but deliberate, like someone walking just out of sight. I spun around, expecting to find my cousin, but the hallway was empty. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the house settling. But the footsteps followed me, echoing with each step I took. Soft, deliberate, and unnervingly close. My heart began to race, and my pulse quickened. I spun around again. Nothing. The air felt heavier now, as if the walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that something was lurking just beyond my vision. I reached the top of the stairs, but the air had grown cold, far colder than it should have been. I stepped into my room, locked the door behind me, and tried to steady my breath. My mind screamed that I was being ridiculous. The house was old, and I'd stayed there countless times. But just as I began to settle, a knock at the door shattered the silence. It was soft at first, almost gentle, like a tap of a finger on wood. I lay perfectly still, listening to the silence. Then another knock, louder this time, more insistent. The chill in the room deepened, and I couldn't move. My hands shook as I slowly climbed out of bed. I called out for my cousin, but there was no answer. With trembling hands, I slowly opened the door, peering into the dark hallway. It was even colder than before. I stepped out and called her name again, my voice barely a whisper. Silence. I walked through the house, room by room, each one colder and more suffocating than the last. When I reached the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The overhead light flickered erratically, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. And then I heard it. "Ava, it's me." The voice was low and gravelly, like it had been dragged through years of decay. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I spun around, but there was no one there. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The house had never felt so cold. I ran back to my room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My heart thundered in my chest, and I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I felt as though something or someone was watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to make a move. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps, and every gust of wind felt like a breath on the back of my neck. The next morning, I tried to shake off the fear and tell my cousin what had happened, but when I did, her face went pale. She looked at me with wide eyes, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, You heard her, didn't you? It turns out the house had been built on land that once belonged to a woman named Ava. She had vanished mysteriously, leaving behind only rumors and ghost stories. The most chilling part: my cousin's grandmother had often mentioned that Ava never truly left the house. Story 2: The Dark Reflection, by Lucas Wren. My name is Lucas Wren, and the night I'll never forget began when I was just 12 years old. It was one of those rare nights when I managed to stay up long after everyone else had gone to bed. I had just gotten a new video game, and I was hooked playing into the quiet hours of the night. The house, like always, was eerily still, the only sound the rhythmic clicking of my controller. And then I heard it. Footsteps, faint but distinct. At first I thought it was nothing, maybe just my parents getting up for a late night drink or heading to the bathroom. But then the footsteps stopped, right outside my door. The silence that followed was oppressive, as though the whole house had held its breath. My heartbeat quickened, and I cautiously opened the door, my mind racing. The hallway was empty. The house was pitch dark, except for the faint light spilling from the bathroom. I stepped into the hall, and my feet seemed to move on their own. The house felt wrong, like something wasn't quite right. I approached the bathroom door, which was slightly ajar. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the bathroom mirror, a figure stood behind me. It wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. The figure was tall, wearing a long coat, and its face, though blurry, seemed to be staring right at me. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, but there was no one there. I turned back to the mirror. The figure remained, its hollow eyes locked on mine. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a reflection. It was something else. Something watching me from beyond the glass. I backed away slowly, my legs trembling. But no matter how far I moved, the figure remained locked in the mirror. And then the unthinkable happened. The figure raised its hand, slowly, deliberately. It reached toward me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The hand, thin and skeletal, stretched from the reflection, its fingers almost grazing the glass. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. I was alone. The figure in the mirror didn't move, but it was still reaching. The fingers seemed to inch closer to my shoulder. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't know what to do. It was like I was stuck, paralyzed by fear. In a sudden panic, I sprinted back to my room and slammed the door shut. I didn't dare open my eyes. I could still feel the weight of that stare, the coldness of the mirror's reflection, watching me from the other side. The next morning, I thought it was all just a nightmare, a trick of the mind. But when I walked past the bathroom, I froze. The mirror was covered in fingerprints, large, grotesque prints that weren't mine. My stomach churned. I didn't stay in the house that day. I had to leave. I didn't look back, but even now, years later, I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. And sometimes when I walk past a mirror in the dark, I swear I feel those cold eyes on me again. Story 3: The Forgotten Watcher, by Elijah Harrow. My name is Elijah Harrow, and this is the story of how I came face to face with something I'll never fully understand, something I hope never to encounter again. It all began in my grandmother's house, a sprawling, crumbling estate that had been in our family for generations. The house was more than just a home. It was a labyrinth of memories and secrets, its walls soaked in whispers and shadows. Even after my grandmother passed, the house remained, silent but never still. My family often spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and objects that seemed to move on their own. But there was one part of the house that even my bravest relatives avoided: the attic. The attic was a place where time seemed frozen. It was cold, perpetually cloaked in a musty smell of old wood and forgotten relics. Among the dusty trunks and moth-eaten curtains, one item always stood out to me: a massive mirror framed in dark mahogany, its surface impossibly pristine despite the decay around it. The mirror seemed to watch me whenever I ventured near, its presence heavy, almost alive. From the first time I saw it, I felt its pull, an inexplicable urge to stand before it, as though it held some secret meant only for me. But every time I did, an unsettling sensation would creep up my spine, forcing me to turn away. One sleepless night, the pull became irresistible. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every creak and sigh. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and unease, I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The air grew colder with each step, and by the time I reached the top, my breath was visible in the dim beam of light. The attic greeted me with its usual stillness, a mausoleum of forgotten family artifacts. But the mirror was different that night. Its surface gleamed faintly, as if lit from within, and I felt an almost magnetic pull toward it. As I approached, the light from my flashlight flickered. I tapped it nervously, trying to steady the beam. The closer I got to the mirror, the heavier the air felt, as though the attic itself was holding its breath. When I stood directly in front of the mirror, my reflection stared back at me, perfectly normal. But something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. A movement, subtle and slow, in the corner of my eye. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as a figure materialized in the background of the reflection. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in a long, tattered coat that seemed to shimmer and ripple like smoke. Its face was obscured, lost in the shadows, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. A surge of icy fear shot through me as I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The attic was empty, nothing but boxes and shadows. My chest tightened as I turned back to the mirror, and there it was, standing just behind me, motionless. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My legs felt like lead, my body rooted to the spot. Then slowly the figure raised a hand, its bony fingers unfurling like the petals of a dying flower. That gesture, it wasn't the first time I'd seen it. A distant memory surfaced, hazy and fragmented. I was a child playing in the attic during a family gathering. I'd looked into the same mirror and seen a similar figure, its hand raised in the same unnerving motion. At the time, I dismissed it as a daydream, a trick of the light. But now, standing there as an adult, I knew it was real. Panic took over. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a stack of boxes. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor and plunging the attic into darkness. I fumbled for the stairs, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and bolted down them without looking back. I didn't stop running until I was outside, standing in the freezing night air, gasping for breath. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and lifeless. But I knew better. Something was watching from inside, something that had been there all along. I never went back to the attic. Eventually, I convinced my family to sell the house, though I never told them why. Sometimes, though, I dream about the mirror. In those dreams, I'm not alone. The figure is always there, waiting for me, watching. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.